So I'm reading through the book of Genesis the other day, and I'm in Jacob's story. And this is a person that I always felt kind of weird about, because God chose him to continue the promise, right, that he gave to Abraham and then Isaac and now Jacob. But like, he took the promise, like he lied to his father. Well, first he lied to, or not lied, but he kind of cheated Esau, right? He bought the birthright and all of that, even though Esau didn't do the right thing either. Like, he just saw it as like it was nothing to him. But I still thought it was just weird. And then he lies to his father, all of this, and I'm like, it just seemed weird. Like, how could this be God's will? But this time around that I'm reading the story, and this isn't the first time I've read it. It just shows how God reveals things when he wants to reveal it to you. He showed me how his life, it parallels our lives, right? How many times has God called us to be a certain person, to do a certain thing for his kingdom, but we didn't start off like perfect, or we didn't start off like, oh, he just knew everything. Like, no, like, God called Jacob from the womb, right? Like, God had spoken to his mom and spoke the blessing, the promise over Jacob. Just because God spoke his promise, it didn't mean that he was going to just already play it out, right? How many times has God called us to do something? Like, there's so many testimonies of people that God has called you for something. I'm a great example of that. Like, when I was a kid, the Lord spoke to me, or not directly, but like, I had always known, like, people had prophesied over me. God would give me dreams. All of these things that I knew that I was called by the Lord as a kid. Yet I lived my life, like, I didn't come back to him until a few years ago, right? So in my early 20s, late teens, there was like, I had turned away from him completely, right? So the Lord showed me like, hey, you went through this. And then, the Lord spoke to Jacob, after his dad dies. He goes off to go find a wife. And as he's going through this wilderness part, he falls asleep. The Lord gives him a dream of the ladder where the angels go up and down. And the Lord speaks to him in this dream. But he's still like, he does better, right? Like, he's not cheating people anymore. He actually does a little bit better. He goes and he finds a wife. And then now now it's almost like he's getting what he sowed, right? So he cheated and lied to his brother and his father. And now Laban, his father-in-law, is like lying to him and cheating him about the wives, right? Like, so he saw Rachel and he's like, I love her, like, let me marry her. And he goes, okay, work for me for 7 years and then I'll give her to you as your wife. He ends up giving him Leah, which is the older sister, the one he didn't want. He tells him something about like, oh, we have a custom that the older daughter needs to be married first or whatever. So if you want Rachel, work for me another 7 years and then you'll have her. So he did. And so right there, he's like already kind of like being cheated the way he was doing before. So now he's kind of getting back what he dished out to his family, right? And then the Lord is blessing him with, with land, or with the sheep and all this. Like he's getting rich. And everything he's doing is prospering. And Laban, his father-in-law, sees this. So he kind of takes advantage, right? He doesn't want him to leave. He's like, you know what? I want to go off and do my own thing and live my own life with my own family. Like, I want to be the leader of my family. And Laban keeps finding excuses like, well, I don't want you to leave and this and that. And then he's like, okay, fine, but you can take these sheep, right? He tries to give them he tries to find a way to where he keeps the good sheep, he keeps the majority, and then you could take all the little extra ones. But the Lord blesses him. He's like, okay, when Laban says, okay, I get all the spotted ones, well then, and then you get all the non-spotted ones, well then they all, like, the more that they populate, they just end up not being spotted, so Jacob ends up with more. And he's like, well, actually, you can keep the spotted ones. So then those populate even more, and he gets more spotted. So either way, God's just blessing him and giving him everything, even though Laban's trying to cheat him out of it. He finally decides, you know what, I'm just going to go. Like I've been here long enough. I'm just going to go finally. So he does, he leaves. And then Laban comes and he's like, hey, why are you taking my family? So Laban is still acting as if all of this that belongs to Jacob is his. And he's like, these are my children. These are my daughters. Your children are my children. Like, he's like saying all of this is mine, right? They end up kind of settling things like, you know what, fine. You're not going to come attack me. I'm not going to come attack you. We'll just make peace and split, right? So then they do. And then they go, and then he gets word that, oh, hey, Esau's coming after you. The last thing he heard from Esau was that he's going to kill him. So now he's like, oh my gosh, first Laban is after me. Now now Esau's after me. What do I do? And he gets to this place where he's like, you know what? I'm going to divide all my people. You know, half of my children go this way, half of my children go that way. And you know, all the livestock that way. If Esau comes, he'll kill one and not the others. And you know, maybe, you know, I'll still be okay. And he's freaking out. He goes off on his own. And it's at this point where he wrestles with God. All of a sudden, it's like he's wrestling with an angel of the Lord. And he's going, and they wrestle all night. And you could just imagine, you know, he's come to the end of himself, you know, because before he wouldn't ever inquire of the Lord. He just did whatever he did. And even though the Lord encountered him and he became kind of a better person, he still didn't inquire of the Lord. He just did things, and the Lord still blessed him because he was called by the Lord, but he didn't inquire of the Lord. He kept trying to do things in his own strength, even though he was kind of walking in the better path. And it's at this point where he's like come to this desperate place, right? And the angel's telling him, like, let me go because day is breaking, like the sun is coming. And he's like, I'm not going to let you go until you bless me, right? And the Lord touches his hip, he messes him up, he walks with a limp the rest of his life, and he changes his name. And it's at this point where everything changes for him. And this is where the Lord showed me, like, this is the same story where we try to do things on our own, and we get to a point where the world is just crumbling on top of us, and we've got no other escape. And it's like, Lord, I won't let you go. Like, you have to help me. You got to bless me. And it's at that point where he gets that identity shift. With just like us as believers, when we surrender to the Lord and we're like, okay, fine, I'm yours. You got to do this. Like, I can't do it in my own strength anymore. You got to do it. That's when we also get our identity shift. And Jacob went from Jacob to Israel, right? He went from being the supplanter, the cheater, the manipulator, to being Israel, to being the father of the nation, right? But even the name Israel, you know, it's known that his name means he who wrestled with God, or something like, you know, he wrestles with God, something like that. And I looked it up, you know, I looked a little deeper, and the literal translation means he turns the head of God. When I found that out, it was just like the Lord opened that up, where it's like he went from thinking he had to do everything on his own. Like, I got to fix this. And it's like, we have that mentality, right? That's why he was cheating. That's why he was undermining and manipulating and lying. And that's what Jacob means. But when the Lord encounters us, we go from that. We go from a Jacob to an Israel to now we turn the head of God. Now he listens to us. Now when we call to him, we get his attention, right? He looks to us as his son, as his daughter. And that was just so powerful. Like, I was like, man. And from there, then he goes and meets Esau, and they actually reconcile. They actually, like, they're friends again, or they're brothers again, right? They're not fighting anymore. And they actually, when their father dies, they bury him together, like, as a family, like there's love. And then he ends up being the father, like Israel comes from him, from the one that was the cheater, from the one that was the manipulator, the liar, right? He is like, now God sees him as his son, right? You go through the rest of the Old Testament and you hear, you know, the story and the history of Israel and all of that. And like, God chose Israel to be his own, right? Like, yeah, he chose the people, but it's the name of Israel, right? Jacob, like forever we will know about Israel, about the man, right? And it was just so powerful to me just to see the similarities where when God encounters you, when you get desperate and the Lord shows up, your identity changes, everything changes. Like, he makes the biggest change in your life, in our lives. And that's what's happened with me, with so many other people, you know? Like, we don't have to do it on our own anymore. We just call on him and we get his attention. We turn the head of God. We turn his attention to us because he cares for us, because he loves us, because we finally gave in to him, because he changed, like God changed Israel's name, right? Nobody else changed his name. God did, right? So when we surrender to him and we get desperate with him, he changes our identity. So it's like the Lord will show me this is like a foreshadowing of the gospel. This is a foreshadowing of what Jesus would do for us. Because now when Jesus comes, he makes that way to take us from our old sinful self to now being sons of God, to now being sons and daughters of God, right? And it's just so beautiful that Jesus is literally all through the word. You know, it's so beautiful to see the gospel, to see New Testament concepts, to see Jesus in the Old Testament, because it just confirms, he says he didn't come to eradicate the law, but he came to fulfill it, right? And it's like we see it everywhere. He's called the Word of God, right? And in the book of John, it says in the beginning, was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then he keeps going, and it's all about Jesus. It's like, okay, well, if he's the Word of God, he can't be absent from the Old Testament. And there he just keeps showing up. And it's just so beautiful. I just wanted to share that we are all like Jacob that then turns into Israel. So anyway, hope that blessed you guys. See you guys on the next one.